Fashion is the armor to survive the reality of everyday life, an acclaimed fashion photographer once said. But in 2023, we need a little more than that, right? Right now, we need to have fashion go hand in hand with sustainability, responsibility, and also the awareness of what the consumer wants, thinks, and actually dream of. That is why I'm happy today to focus your attention to these matters and subjects in this talk, Runway to Change, for the next 45 minutes. My name is Miriam Zesler. I'm a Danish TV anchor, and today I am joined by a very well-chosen panel of industry leaders. Here we have Cecilie Thorsmark, CEO of Copenhagen Fashion Week. Next is Maria Skotte, who is the Director of Sustainability Services here at Copenhagen Airport. And finally, Tom Savigar, founder of Avansere and designing next generation enterprises. In other words, some would call you a retail trend specialist. Wonderful to have you all. Thank you for joining me today. As you are noticing, we are actually situated in Copenhagen Airport because Copenhagen Fashion Week and the airport on a new journey together, joining forces to create an experience from landing to the actual departure itself. And I'm going to start by giving you all 2 minutes and a chance to tell us more about what you are currently working on when it comes to the development within the coming years from a consumer point of view, the fashion industry, but of course also the airport. And since we are in the airport, Maria Skotte, you've had your current job since September, but you've worked on these matters and these subjects for a very long time, for years with other big companies. So I'm going to start off by you.
Thank you. Well, I'm extremely glad that we're having this talk today. I think it's important that we knowledge share and that we inspire each other across industries. The aviation sector accounts for 2% of global emissions, so I really have a huge task ahead of me. Or CPH does. We want to act responsibly. We want to take care of our employees, of the environment, but also be a good neighbor. And this entails looking at our CO2 emissions, our environmental footprint, and also the impact we have on local environment. And we have set some ambitious, very long-term goals because when you're in an airport, it requires long-term investments in infrastructure, etc. We want to become net zero in 2030. That's meaning we want to eliminate CO2 emissions from our own operations. And in 2050, we have a goal of eliminating CO2 within the entire value chain, meaning operations, but also the planes and the fuels from the planes, which will be a huge task. And then we also want to become a circular airport, meaning that we want to use less, better and longer, meaning we need to decrease our consumption, we need to think about how we use the materials we have, and we want to reduce our waste streams. And all this will entail cooperation across the entire organization of 2,500 people, but also a close cooperation with our partners. For example, brands in the shopping center, etc. I think that was my 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's move on to you, Cecilie. You've been the CEO of Copenhagen Fashion Week since 2018, and I know that these matters are very important to you. You're very vocal about it as well. So let's hear it from you.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. You're right. I've been on board for about 5 years almost, and I think I can begin by just sharing an anecdote of why I took the job. I was working at a sustainability advocacy organization before, was very passionate about that, and loved a work that entailed purpose first and foremost. Also fashion, but purpose. But I applied for the job because I found that there was a big potential to challenge the purpose of a fashion week, the format of a fashion week, and in this case, Copenhagen Fashion Week. So in short, what I wanted to do and what we announced just when I had started was our ambition to transition from being a normal fashion week putting on brilliant shows and events and entertainment for the industry and for consumers, and instead becoming a platform for driving positive change within the industry. We invited many different consultants, experts, researchers to join our journey and to inform us and to liaise with in general. And that resulted in a 3-year sustainability action plan that we presented in 2020, where the biggest milestone, or definitely the most significant achievement within that sustainability action plan would be the implementation of sustainability requirements. Meaning that we would, and that we successfully now have implemented 18 minimum standards that all brands must comply with and be able to document in order to take part in Copenhagen Fashion Week. So if you want to be a part of this, beautiful, glamorous platform that really is a driver of both, PR and also sales for the industry, it's a very, very important platform. Then you must have responsible business practices throughout the entire value chain. So our 18 minimum standards require change within the entire value chain. And we implemented that in February, this February 2023. So this summer season will be the second season where it's a requirement.
And how all that is going, we're going to dive in later on. But now I'm going to ask you, Tom, because as I said, this is a well-chosen panel and you've worked on these exact matters for more or less 20 years. So please enlighten us with your insights.
I think what you're saying is exactly the right move. I think we're at a moment in especially modern history, whereby you look ahead to the next 5-10 years and it's a perfect storm coming. So there's a lot of economic uncertainty, which actually makes the game an interesting game of creativity. So the well-trodden business models of before won't work. We have to rethink. We have to be able to adapt much quicker as businesses. I think what you're doing is exactly that. We look ahead and we see things like climate crisis and I think more importantly, nature crisis. And that's creating a very interesting almost realization in people that their lifestyles can't be the same as they used to be. We are sitting in an airport, which is an interesting one when you think about it in the future. What does that mean? None of us are sitting here with no clothes on, but we like clothes. What does that mean in the future? And then we have a health and interesting well-being sort of dynamic, whereby in the last couple of years, we've all had the same doorstep challenge. We've all had to think about our health and our wellness at a whole different level. And that means that we're more conscious, mentally, physically, about what is right for our lives and what's not right. So the conversations around sustainability and fashion as one of the top industries that has a big challenge when it comes to that are very real. And when you think about the dominant consumer in the future, who will be Gen Z, they're currently early 20-somethings, they're growing up with this. This is going to be their norm. This is going to be their default behavior.
That's very interesting. Thank you all of you for those opening remarks. And let me just start off by you, Tom, because you're actually addressing something that I would like to start this talk off with by looking at things from a consumer perspective. And as you were saying, the platform is actually burning right now in more ways than one. So tell us first how the consumer of the future looks like.
Yeah. I hope. I hope that they are more resilient. I hope that they handle anxiety much better than current dominant populations. So I think they are developing a muscle to be able to be adaptive to change, that they embrace transformation, and they are more activists than ever before. So that means that if you, and I think this is just generally humans, so if you are a business trying to attract that consumer, if we call them that for some hours of the day, we have a much more enlightened activist mindset that we have to appeal to. So therefore, price, product, positioning, all these things that go into being a brand and a business will have to be enhanced. So you've got an interesting, I think, journey ahead as the population moves into a space of reconnecting to these things.
So Cecilie, how do you see a change toward a new type of consumer or client, if you want to call them that?
So I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic, unfortunately, but it is because we, especially in the fashion industry, we tend to put our eggs in the Gen Z basket, and really trust that it's Gen Z that will save the fashion industry and save the planet ultimately. The thing is that there is a gap between their what they say they look for and their actual behavior. And so while we of course are hearing Gen Z being very vocal about sustainability and some even very activist, we see a growing market within fast fashion, for example, and we see price as being, a parameter that actually outweighs often the more ethical and responsible parameters of fashion. But I'm not blaming it on the consumer, I'm blaming it on the industry and ourselves, because what we need is to be able to better educate and inform. We also need, and we are looking into a whole new legislative environment here in the EU with some very strict and stringent sustainability textile strategy, which will translate into directives very soon and legislation. So we need that, because I think traditionally, or the biggest challenge in our industry has been that it's been such an under-regulated industry. It's been some sort of like Wild West where the companies have adapted to the demands of the consumer, and if the demand is very price focused, then of course you need to customize your business to meet the needs of low prices. So we are looking into a legislative environment that will enact change within the industry, force change upon the industry. Yep. And of course we need to be able to balance it, and it needs to be realistic for the industry. But I think we have the responsibility. It is actually not the responsibility of the consumer to understand what's a better purchase than the other. So
that strategy you're talking about is the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles that is being worked on right now as we speak, actually, in these coming months. Maria, when we're talking about fashion and aviation, it's some things that sometimes collide a little bit with sustainability, but I know that you experience as well that the consumers, the clients, people walking past us here are very much keeping an eye on what you do. Can you please explain that to us?
I mean, I think in my line of business, I'm really happy for this, that the passengers are critical and they are observant and they are starting to pose demands. It's actually making my work a lot easier. For example, waste sorting. As you noticed, we are not in place with that in Copenhagen Airport, but we are working very hard to get this in place. People are wondering, why are you not sorting your waste? But it has taken a lot of time analyzing our waste streams and how can we actually be successful in installing the right bins so people will actually sort it in the right way. But when we do it, it will be efficient, it will be digital, and it will be very, we will be really increasing the recycling rate. So things like that. So I just really enjoy, and I'm very content that people are critical, that they're going on this journey. Maybe that's not they might have some conscious, bad conscience.
So it's sort of like a proof of what Tom and Cecilie is talking about. So Tom, when we're looking at this also from a industry perspective as well, how do you target that kind of audience?
I think what's interesting is we've identified the hope gap. And I think the hope gap is exactly the task at hand, is that we need to create the conditions to close this hope gap. And I think that's the role of business, that the role of business is not about necessarily just making money. We need to be able to run the businesses, yes, but it's actually about asking ourselves the bigger question of like, what is an enterprise here to do? It's to actually create the conditions for this mass change to happen. And I think that's very much interwoven into the how do we target, how do we think about this, how do we follow through with this? And I've definitely noticed in conversations in the last 3 years that year on year, that way of thinking has begun to enter the boardrooms. Why are we doing this? Like, what is the bigger reason for growth? And what does that mean? And I think if you have an influence in the world, for example, fashion is very influential, we know that. Out of all the industries, it has an impact on people's feelings and all sorts of other things. And it's about harnessing that positive energy for good reasons. And I think there are many industries like food where it's exactly the same conversation. It's a very positive thing, not just sustenance, but we enjoy food. How do we harness the moment of consumption in the right way?
Growth in itself is not a target in itself anymore.
No, but it's a change. It's a change.
So, Cecilie, how does that align with the way that the fashion industry is developing right now? Also, in regards to what you said about what you want for the Copenhagen Fashion Week, how do you see that change?
I see the fashion industry having moved tremendously over the last, especially the last decade or so. It's gone from, being an awareness thing, you had it on your radar and
it was out there.
You were talking about, we need to change. But I think also, parallel to, the climate crisis, the climate emergency, it has definitely sped up, and I have actually, throughout the years, I've talked to so many fashion brands and CEOs in particular, also speaking of boardrooms and leadership, but being frustrated by, there's so much talking, but it's also, we're getting so little guidance, whether it's because of the lack of regulation or just in general, what do we do? It's a massive jungle of, what is sustainability actually? So we've seen these, last year's brands having a very keen focus on action and implementing new business practices, models, really being a lot more ambitious within sustainability. Also, of course, hoping that our sustainability requirements have pushed many of them to do so.
Because I just want to ask you about that, because you mentioned that in your opening remarks that you pushed that agenda, and in the beginning nobody met the requirements. No. How does that look now?
Well, we have a full-blown fashion week happening, and we have more than 30 brands on our schedule, and all of the 30 brands are living up to our criteria. And have been screened by Ramble, who's our partner to do the screening of the documentation, really making sure that everything is in place. And but you're right, when we did our first pilot test of our sustainability requirements back in the beginning of 21, I believe. And none of the pilot brands lived up to all 18 minimum standards. I would say maybe we're looking at an average of maybe 10, 12 minimum standards that they were able to comply with. So, but what's been important for us, and the reason also why we gave the brands 3 years to to live up to the minimum standards, was because during those 3 years, our most important task was to, of course, guide them, take them by the hand and really make sure that they had sufficient level of knowledge and understanding of our sustainability requirements, but also that they had time to implement whatever they needed to implement in order to get everything in order. So so going from 0 brands living up to all 18 minimum standards 2.5 years ago to now a full schedule of more than 30 brands is, of course, really a success that we are celebrating, but we are also very focused on the fact that we need to keep developing the minimum standards, because all of the time we are you know, we are informed by new knowledge or new legislation, for example, coming up. So we need to always be on top of that and revise our minimum standards on a running basis. So in order to keep being very ambitious and to keep, really, going.
Maria, one thing is that you are actually the head of 30 people working with this here at the airport, but in what other ways do you experience that the aviation industry works and behaves in this field of sustainability and growth, not growth, whatever we want to call it?
Well, I think it seems that the aviation industry has suddenly realized that there is a huge task and we need to solve it. There is a demand for this. We will not survive as an industry if we do not solve this. So we are very keen on entering into partnerships. We're keen on doing innovations because we need to change the way we're doing things. And it's everything. It's our shopping center. Do we have the right mix of shops? It is the way we operate the airport. It needs to be completely renewable energy, as an example. So we really need to change everything. And the difficult task about that is that we're like a small village in operation 24/7, and we need to make this change while we're in operation. So, and we also have a lot of legislative requirements, which I think is a good push for the industry, but it also makes it complex. I mean, of course, when we talk aviation, safety is number one, but of course, sustainability is now actually becoming part of our license to operate as well.
So do you experience that it's something that is something people want, it's important, it's not being hidden anymore, it's out in the open?
You mean within the industry? Yeah, very much. I think, like you said, it's been something that has been communicated. You know, we say the right things, we have the right strategies, but now it's really focused on implementation and setting aside the needed investments. And that's what I talked about, the long-term plans. You know, how can we develop this airport in the future to meet the requirements?
So Tom, both industries present here are both industries extremely challenged when it comes to sustainability, when we look at it from an overall perspective. What is your key advice for now, but also for the future for those two industries?
That's a really big question.
I'm all ears.
Yeah. Now we're going to take notes.
I think it's about understanding what does reaching the point of doing no harm really mean? And I think when you reach a point of doing no harm, then you need to be able to demonstrate that. And that's across all aspects. So whether it's all dimensions of human health and security, carbon, water, energy, waste. So once all those things have been demonstrated that you do no harm in all those spheres, then I think the interesting game begins, which is then how do we then restore and how do we then regenerate what's around us? And I think that's the bigger long-term direction is getting to a point of net zero, which is a good phrase to describe carbon, but net zero harm across lots of things. Just getting to that point is a journey in itself. But then that's, I think, just the beginning of actually creating a business and an environment that creates a positive impact, not a negative impact. Now, to be able to do that, in a very short answer, it's three things. One is you need to have a mindset to be able to do that. That mindset requires leaders in particular to be comfortable with reinventing things constantly. And that's
being able to change your company or the industry fast.
Exactly. For example, ask the question about how you report your profit and loss, including all negative and positive things you do on the balance sheet. That's very, very rare. And all of a sudden your balance sheet will look very different. If you put natural capital and social capital onto a balance sheet, you might not actually be making a profit, for example. As well as that, we need to think about the importance of behavior. And those behaviors are often around being very eager and brave, yes, but fundamentally being systemic, like really thinking through and knowing the answer to where do we actually make an impact, negative and positive? And I think the fact that you describe the whole value chain, that whole value chain, including the airlines, becomes a very interesting, bigger conversation. So therefore collaboration and actually having a grown-up conversation together about a value chain. So lots of things.
But it also sounds like transparency is
100%.
a very important thing here, that the consumer, the client, the passengers, that they actually can see what is actually happening.
Yes.
Or
yes.
not happening. But
well, that's right. And especially in fashion, if you think about something like circular ID and the work by Aeon Group and, being able to understand where is this product from, where is it going to, and the traceability and transparency that creates trustworthiness is going to be very interesting. And I know we were talking about Gen Z, but I think importantly, the over 50 consumer who is incredibly conscious of their footprint and importantly, their handprint, what they leave behind is increasingly important to them.
Yeah.
So the legacy of what am I actually doing with my life, So I think the sentiment that data about product or about environment, the understanding of one's existence becomes a very big, almost existential thing, which is quite, I think, very exciting.
But also one thing that I've noticed while you've been talking is also that responsibility seems to be a key word here, Cecilie.
I think, responsibility or sustainability, I think there are different definitions, and then again, it's all the same. We use the word responsibility more than sustainability, generally speaking, because as of now, there's really very, very few companies who can label themselves as a sustainable brand providing sustainable products. So for us, it's about driving or having sustainability, or you can also call it responsibility, but as your main focus in taking action and really seeking to reduce your footprint within, whether it's your carbon footprint or environmental, social footprint, seeking to reduce it all the time and do better, ultimately causing no harm, achieving net zero. We can all agree to that, but until then, I think it's important that we understand also how we communicate about sustainability in fashion, and that we all know of the rules, especially here in Denmark, of the Danish ombudsman, consumer ombudsman. There are very defined rules as of how you can communicate about sustainability, and it's something that definitely put our industry on a journey to understand how to communicate and us and ourselves as well. So yeah.
I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Just want to ask you, Maria, how you are being, since this is all new and something that you have to keep evolving while you're working at it, where do you look to get inspired, or by what are you inspired to make a positive change here?
Yeah, in Denmark there are a lot of great companies, a lot of leaders within this area, not within my industry, but of course we get inspired by these companies. But it can also be across the aviation sector. We have meetups where we talk about this. It can be different topics, the new sustainable aviation fuels. How will we succeed in developing this? We don't sell fuels, but we are responsible for having the right infrastructure so that the airlines can use the right fuel. So we're looking at these trends all the time. So it's both within the industry, but also to other companies. And as I said in my introduction, we're very much, I'm very inspired by other industries. For example, just our introduction talk, I'm like, okay, the requirements you're working with, could we use those towards in our work? And so I think we need to learn from each other.
So you need to break down barriers between industries as well to learn from each other.
Yeah, exactly. And it can also be technologies being used in one industry. Could they actually serve a purpose in our industry? Things like that all the time. And that's where the partnerships and collaborations come into play. Yeah.
But it also does sound, to go back to the communication, Cecilie, that sounds like greenwashing or can be a challenge here, because as we were talking about before, the transparency needs to be there, or maybe even green hushing. Why do you think that is?
I think it's such a fine balance to strike between greenwashing and green hushing, it definitely puts the brands on a very complex task. You know, of course, you cannot put out false claims. You're not allowed to put out false claims, and on the other hand, do communicate what you are doing differently, because otherwise we'll never educate the consumer. So it's a very fine balance.
But why do you think that there is some maybe restrictions within the industry to actually say what they're doing? Why do you think that is?
I think first of all, it's brands are scared to communicate in a manner that could be perceived as false claims. They are scared of being accused of greenwashing. They're scared of ending up in a shitstorm. We've seen it, and it can be so damaging. I totally understand that. I'm also, scared of that in our work with, and especially as a fashion week. You have various perceptions and connotations of a fashion week and ideas of what a fashion week is and should be, and that's also why, from the very beginning, speaking of working very systematically and structured, it was my biggest focus was to put out work that was very thoroughly worked on, researched on, and very structured, and not some top level fluffy announcements of how we would love to be a more responsible fashion week. We really needed to make sure that we had. So I understand the industry, and that's exactly also what has inflicted on our work as well. That's why we put out a 3-year sustainability action plan, sharing with the whole public. These are our targets every year that we wish to achieve. We also report on them annually to, be transparent about what we achieved and what we maybe did not achieve.
It's interesting to hear you explain about this fear within the industry or within the companies themselves. And Tom, do you think that the industries that we're talking about here need to maybe fear the consumer or client a bit less?
I think there's a confidence problem. Because I think economically, it's never straightforward at the moment, economically or even politically. And that has an effect on leadership, potentially confidence levels. And when you're not confident, you don't embrace vulnerability. If you don't know yourself and you don't believe in yourself, you tend not to be vulnerable. So I think embracing vulnerability as a skill and as a discipline is very humbling. I like to use the word, instead of storytelling, story doing. And if you're story doing, it means you're authentic. And if you're
proactive.
Proactive, yes. So having a plan and having an authentic story to tell about the actions you have taken means you can be vulnerable about that. You can be open about that. And I think there's a lot of catching up to do. I think a lot of people that run businesses at a very senior level were taught a certain way, especially probably the 1990s or the 2010s, So we've got to rethink, we've got to relearn. And some of those skills are not just what young people think, but fundamentally, they're human skills. They're human abilities that, personally, I feel when I work with businesses, at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, depending on what time you start work, you somehow lose those human skills. You become a leader, a business person. And then at 5 o'clock, you put your human skills back on again. And I've noticed in the last 3 years, through Teams and Zoom, actually having human conversations again. Going, hey, I think we have a human moment coming, where you can see leaders going, I wonder if we should be more human about this decision versus business. And I think that's why things are changing. The world is humbling a lot of our mindsets to think, what would actually be the human thing to do here? And I think it's changing business slowly.
So Maria, how do you tackle this that we're talking about right now as these issues as an airport now, but also in the future?
Well, I think when you talk about the differences in disciplines, I really see, I mean, my experience is that by moving the communication team very close to my specialist team, that is really good.
Yes.
So that we start, so it's not just seen from a communication angle, but we sort of, what is the good story? Where do we want to communicate? Where does it make sense? Because if you're very specialized into soil pollution, I mean, you're not thinking about how should I communicate about this. You're thinking about how should I solve the pollution problem. So I think by really making sure that these people are very closely engaged, I think that's the way forward. I mean, we need to understand each other's disciplines. And I think, I mean, my strategy on this topic is to try to be very transparent and really be open about, I mean, this is a long-term development and it's not perfect where we are now, but I want to ensure everyone that we are having plans, we're following them, we're breaking the plans down into short-term plans that we can follow year by year. Because I think I agree with you that the very long-term goals, you know, it just becomes words. We need to show what are the actual action plans.
So how are you communicating that to the passengers here at the airport?
Well, right now it's very immature. I would say we need to communicate a lot more. But here we will, I mean, we're doing it both locally, but also by having this talk and promoting what we're doing. This type of initiatives will be the way forward, trying to use different channels and thereby reaching different targets. But we're not perfect where we are right now, so there's a lot to do to be more open and be more communicative about what we're doing. So,
speaking about that, some people will say that the fashion week or the fashion industry is not ambitious enough. You can do more, you have to change more. Do you think that there will be a time when you'll look back and say, now the fashion industry is ambitious enough on these matters?
No, I don't think. I mean, I don't think the work will ever stop. I think, you know, with the raging climate crisis, again, maybe being a little bit pessimistic / realistic, I think we're only going to look into more, you know, severe climate and severe problems in our world. So I don't think we'll come at a point where we say, okay, well, we did it and it's ambitious enough. Of course, we need to constantly challenge ourselves and and look towards you know, new or more progress being made within our industry.
So how often do you break down the plans and get new ideas and get new agendas, new goals? How often do you do that?
Annually. So, as I mentioned, we announced our sustainability requirements in 2020. They came into effect in 2023. And now annually we will revise the existing minimum standards, tweaking or rephrasing in a way that lifts all the 18 minimum standards to a newer or a greater level, as well as introducing one new minimum standard per year. I don't know when the work stops. Hopefully never. But
you are working on it right now, which is a good lead to just wrap up what we've been talking about here for the last 45 minutes. It sounds like responsibility, transparency, and also the ability to change and evolve all the time is keywords here. And this is, I guess, not only for these industries, but especially also for these industries, Tom.
Yes. Yeah, these two industries are in the top 5 industries that are the biggest problem. So in terms of carbon and in terms of water and in terms of other damaging effects. So there are some very intense transformations happening, which won't stop, I agree with you. I think they're permanent now. The only thing that's going to be constant is change. So the idea of, but actually the thing about change is people don't mind changing. They just don't like change happening to them. So I think we need to dig deep and think about learning to transform constantly and know that week on week or year on year, that journey will be enlightening and it will be a very awakening experience for a lot of people. I think it will transform those people who are going through that change as well, not just the businesses. But for me, it's about a sense of being intrepid. When you're intrepid, you're not scared of the unknown. And right now, I feel when I meet people like you and who are in the real thick of transformation, making it happen, the resilience to actually almost like the maintaining of that motivation and the energy required to permanently do this is also something to be recognized. So in terms of almost health and wellness as a conversation as well, to actually maintain this drive and this constant transformation is something not to be underestimated. Yeah.
And I think that that's what we're underlining now by having talked about
Yes.
it this afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining me here today. Tom Savigar from Avansere, Maria Skotte from the airport, and last but not least, Cecilie Thorsmark from Copenhagen Fashion Week. Thank you so much for having this talk with me, and thank you, last but not least, for watching this talk. Thank you very much.